What's going on, guys? Welcome back to Burrows Bottoms Fantasy Football. I'm going to try something a little bit different today. I'm going to be live streaming the Week 6 previews. Um, Give me 1 second. Let me make sure that thumbnail is up. Oh well, not really sure how to do that, but we'll figure it out. So we'll dive right into the first matchup of this week, Pick and Six versus Jack's team. Obviously, Pick and Six already had Brandon Ayuk play. He put up 5.7 points. Kind of another lackluster performance from Ayuk. What we can really expect from him weekly. I don't see him ever really making the leap. I think that this offense is going to be run through Debo and Kittle and whoever the running back is, whether it's CMC or Mason or even Isaac Garendo, who ripped off that 70-yard run last night. Pick and Six has Kyler going up against Green Bay. I think this could be a pretty good matchup for Kyler. Green Bay's run defense is a little bit weaker than their pass defense, so I expect to see James Conner get a lot of points. Kyler might get some rushing points, maybe a couple pass touchdowns if they can get it within the 20-yard line, but I'm not too excited for Kyler, but I don't really have that many other QBs I'm super excited for. Jahmyr Gibbs against Dallas. Dallas just is doing terribly against running backs. I mean, Najee Harris put up some decent yardage against them last week. Um, I don't expect Detroit to pass the ball as much, but I still think that some of their main targets could get fed. Brees Hall against Buffalo. We saw Buffalo absolutely crumble to, um, I mean, the Ravens running attack, and so I think that Brees Hall and Braylon Allen could hopefully put up some points, like see what we actually expect out of Brees Hall instead of these like 5 points, 3 points that he's been putting up consistently. I'm on Russ St. Brown. I already touched on in the Detroit matchup. I think that he's going to be fed. I think that Laporta might get some decent points for a tight end, and I think that James Williams might get some decent points, but I think this is mainly going to go through the run game of Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. Trey McBride against that Green Bay defense. I like McBride here. I think that Jair is going to be on Marvin Harrison, uh, and then Xavier McKinney kind of hanging deeper. I think that Trey McBride could see a bunch of targets in the middle of the field, kind of short distance. Um, and I like him for this week. I put Roshan Johnson in my flex instead of Pickens or Brian Thomas Jr. Because I think this Jacksonville defense will give up a lot of points to this Bears team. I think that Jacksonville could still pull off the win, but I think that Chicago is just going to run the ball down their throats. And Roshan Johnson and DeAndre Swift are going to see a bunch of points. I think that Roshan will see the end zone Monday or Sunday morning. Um, and then we go over to Jack's team. Josh Allen hasn't been playing great. Um, I don't expect him to continue to look as bad as he has looked, but I'm not too keen on this matchup either. I know James Cook is injured and has missed practice for a couple of days, so I'm not expecting to see him playing this week. The Jets could get a bounce back win after firing their head coach. Um, you know, uh, you yeah. Moving on. Derrick Henry, obviously going to go off against this Washington defense. Washington is basically just um, they basically don't have anyone in the defense realistically, but I think that Derrick Henry could go off. Lamar could throw for a bunch of yards, but I think this is going to be a mainly rushing game out of the Baltimore backfield. Jonathan Taylor obviously being out. I expect Jack's team to switch Jonathan Taylor out. But if he doesn't, then that is better for me. I only put up 5.7 points with one of my wide receivers. So A.J. Brown back from that hamstring injury against the Cleveland defense that hasn't looked too great. I expect to see a lot of points from A.J. Brown. Maybe it might be more of a Saquon game, but I expect to see A.J. Brown get a lot of work as he has been resting for the past 3 or 4 weeks. Stephon Diggs, now that Nico Collins is out. Um, I don't see Christian Gonzalez shadowing Diggs or Dell. I think he kind of just floats and takes on whoever's kind of lined up across from him. So I could see a big game from Diggs here. I think that Stroud is going to have to rely on Diggs because Joe Mixon's availability is still up in there. Obviously, Nico being out, Tank Dell hasn't looked like Tank Dell last year. So I think that Diggs could see a ton of work this week. Jake Ferguson against Detroit. We obviously have seen some somewhat okay games from tight ends against Detroit. Obviously, there's really just Ferguson, CD, and Jalen Tolbert in this Dallas offense. Dallas's run offense has looked pretty terrible, and Detroit's run defense is pretty good. So I expect to see a decent amount of points from Ferguson. And then DeAndre Swift, kind of what I touched on about Roshan Johnson, except a little bit more productivity. I don't know if he's going to hit the 17-point mark he's projected, but I could expect like about 15 points from this game. Um, with Jonathan Taylor being out, I expect to see DeAndre Swift in that running back slot. And then if we head down to his bench, maybe a Calvin Ridley in his flex spot, DeAndre Hopkins or Amari Cooper possibly. Moving on to our next matchup, Fom's Fantasia versus Deeper. Fom's Fantasia obviously putting up 30.6 points in that Thursday night game, with George Kittle really carrying this, 22.8 points with those 2 touchdowns for 5 grabs and 58 yards. DK Metcalf could have had a much bigger game, but that one touchdown was called back, and I think he had a second touchdown that his foot was barely out of bounds with. So we could have seen a monster game from DK. Joe Burrow against the Giants team, I really like it. Giants secondary has been bleeding points to quarterbacks and wide receivers, and I expect to see a big game from the Cincinnati offense. Tony Pollard against Indy. Indy's run defense hasn't looked really great, and Tennessee is kind of finding their pace on running the ball. I don't expect there to be that much passing in this game from Tennessee's side. I expect to see Tony Pollard see a lot of the work. Tank Bigsby in. He doesn't really have many other options. I mean, Brian Robinson Jr. obviously out with that injury. So I don't hate Tank Bigsby. I think he could get a bunch of rushing work. I don't know if he sees the end zone, and he probably won't see any of the receiving work, but he has been taking over this Jacksonville backfield. So I expect to see a decent amount of rushing work. He could possibly put up like 10 points against this Chicago team who has a pretty good secondary, but not that great of a run defense. Tank Dell, kind of what I mentioned about Stephon Diggs about. New England has a pretty good secondary, but I don't see Christian Gonzalez really shadowing either of these 2 wide receivers. So I expect to see Dell getting more points than we're used to so far this season. I think he could easily soar above this 13 if he gets in the end zone once. Moving on to Jalen Tolbert, he's definitely becoming the clear wide receiver 2 here. I think that even when Brandon Cooks returns, Jalen Tolbert still sees the wide receiver 2 work. He obviously got in the end zone last week against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Detroit secondary is a little shaky, as we kind of saw in that Seahawks game a couple of weeks ago. I expect to see a decent amount of work going to Tolbert in this game, especially if Dallas can't get their run game sorted. Moving on to deeper, Kirk Cousins. We obviously saw that monster 500-yard performance from last week. He's going up against Panthers. I expect to see a big game from this duo of Kirk Cousins and Bijan Robinson because Carolina's defense might be one of the worst in the league. I'm not sure if Bijan's going to get that 18-point mark. we've really yet to see anything from him, at least with Brees in week 1 and week 2. We saw some big games. Bijan hasn't really gone over like 15-ish points. I don't know if he's really ended up in the end zone so far this year. Let's take a look. In the 2024 season, 5 games played, 67 carries, 285 yards, and 1 touchdown. Not great stats from what's supposed to be a first-round pick, but I could see a big bounce-back game from Bijan against this Carolina team. Chase Brown, we saw Zach Moss go down with a little bit of an injury in the Ravens game. So if Chase Brown sees the majority of the work in this Giants game, I expect to see a decent amount of points from him. I think that since he's going to want to run the ball near the end of the game, since they're going to be up, and I could see Chase Brown getting some receiving work as well. DJ Moore against this Jacksonville team, I expect to see the Bears run the ball a little bit more than pass, but I still think DJ Moore could see some decent points. 14.8 is about right where I would project him. This should be an interesting one. London games are traditionally not that great, so I'd bear that in mind when starting any Jacksonville or Chicago players. Terry McLaurin against the Baltimore Ravens, projected 16.7. He's obviously Jaden Daniels' number 1 target, especially with B Rob being out, like we saw over here in Fonz Fantasio's team. Think that Terry could see a bunch of work. We just saw Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase dice up this Baltimore defense. Baltimore really needs to get their defense right if they want to continue to show the dominance that they've showed the past couple of weeks. Pat Freiermuth versus Las Vegas. This one I'm not really too excited for. I hate most of the 4 o'clock games. Besides like this Atlanta Carolina game. Pittsburgh versus Raiders should be just a pretty crappy game. Aiden O'Connell obviously starting for the Raiders. I could see Pat Freiermuth getting some work in. I know there's a bunch of drama with George Pickens right now, so maybe they try and target Freiermuth a little bit more if they decide to pass the ball, which I think they will against Max Crosby and this Raiders defensive line. And then James Conner, obviously the Green Bay running defense is pretty bad, so I expect to see a lot of work from him, unless the Cardinals go down big, which I don't think they will. I think that they'll hang in there for most of the game, but I think Green Bay will end up pulling off the win. I expect to see more points than 14 for James Conner. I think he could see the end zone once, if not twice. Big thing for me, looking at Deeper's bench, he has Deontay sitting, Dak sitting, Garrett Wilson sitting. I could see Garrett Wilson going off more than maybe like a DJ Moore. I like Kirk over Dak, honestly. Dalton Kincaid versus Pat Freiermuth. I'm not too sure how to play that. I mean, I'm not too sure about Khalil Shakir's injury. Plus, Dalton Kincaid is kind of like a touchdown reliant tight end, and I don't see him doing that well this week. But Fonz Fantasia projected 109, Deeper projected 117. I'm kind of banking on Deeper to win this, but could go either way. They're both 1-4. This is kind of the toilet bowl matchup of this week. Moving on to Mason Deserved It versus Kareem Pie. Obviously, Kareem Pie 1-4-0. Mason Deserved It 4-1. Mason Deserved It. Lamar Jackson against his Washington team should absolutely eat. I expect to see at least a 25-point performance, if not near 30 from him. Alvin Kamara against Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay really needs to figure out their defense. It is a little bit scary with Spencer Rattler coming in for Derek Carr, but I still expect to see Alvin Kamara get a ton of touches, and I think he could absolutely destroy this defense. Chuba Hubbard, I just traded Mason Deserved It. Chuba Hubbard, I think that he's going to get a lot of work in this Carolina team, at least until Jonathan Brooks is back. So I think it's a good start for the next couple of weeks. Atlanta has been an all right defense. They led up that one big run to Rachaad White, but other than that, kind of stopped him. I think Chuba, if he gets some of the pass catching work, he could easily hit this 15.7. CD against Detroit, they're really going to have to go to their wide receivers. CD's kind of been slacking when it comes to production so far, but I expect to see him kind of go off this week. Um, then we go to Drake London against Carolina. Drake London had that amazing game last week against the Tampa Bay defense. I expect to see him getting some big work this week as well against a crappier Carolina defense. Brock Bowers is kind of the only target in this Las Vegas team besides Davante Adams, but obviously Davante Adams is kind of missing a couple games trying to get traded. I could see him doing pretty well. Obviously, this Pittsburgh defense is pretty rough, but 12.3 seems like a good projection. And then Jaden Reed against this Arizona team. Reed has dominated as the clear wide receiver one with Jordan Love in Green Bay. I expect him to soar over this 14.8 projection. And Arizona's defense has looked pretty bad, and I think that Reed could get a lot of work this week. We go over to Cream Pie's team. Jaden Daniels, obviously looking amazing so far. I don't know if he has that great of a week this week, but if he does, then it really just cements him as a rookie of the year and QB1 candidate for this entire year. 24.5 seems a little high, but we've seen him hit it so many times that I'm not really scared. James Cook, obviously projected 15. He has been dealing with a little bit of an injury if we go here. He was deemed a non-participant in Friday's walkthrough, so that means he's probably not playing. So it's a little bit risky for Kareem Pie's team with Ramondre Stevenson out and James Cook out. He needs to go to his bench and pick up Austin Eckler off the bench and I guess Zamir White, which isn't looking too great. Then we go over to Marvin Harrison Jr. I think that Jair Alexander is going to be on MHJ, and we could see some limited points from him this week. Chris Godwin, I really like this week. I think that Marshawn Lattimore is going to be on Mike Evans as they have that, kind of historic rivalry. But I think that Godwin could absolutely eat against this New Orleans defense, especially because they're pretty good at stopping the run besides what they did to Kareem Hunt last week. I expect Godwin to get a lot of points. Tucker Kraft against Arizona. I really like this Green Bay offense in general. Tucker Kraft and Jaden Reed are kind of the 1 and 2, besides Josh Jacobs, obviously. But I expect Green Bay to want to throw the ball a lot more, kind of dominate this game. Chris Olave against Tampa Bay. With Spencer Rattler throwing in the ball, I know Spencer Rattler has said that he really wants to get the ball to Olave, so we could see an uptick in production for Olave, which we haven't really seen at all this week or at all this year. So I think he's an all right flex start. Obviously, if we come down to his bench, he doesn't really have any more people to put in this flex spot, so about as good as he's going to get. Mason deserved a projected 135, and Kareem Pie only projected 105, and that is with James Cook's 15 points, so he's really projected 90 right now. He needs to sort out his running backs and sort them out quickly. We go over to Caleb's Dogs versus Elon Equality. Obviously, Caleb's Dogs had that big performance from Debo, putting up 20.7 points last night. Caleb Williams, I'm not too sure about how he's going to perform in England. England is kind of a home stadium for Jacksonville. They played there so many times. I don't really expect Caleb to be great this game. Metcalf did get robbed of 2 touchdowns, Matthew, and I'm not planning on dropping Anthony Richardson. I'm going to try and trade him, or maybe hold on to him at least one more week. We go to Joe Mixon. I'm not too sure. I haven't checked his injury report, really. He was a limited participant in Thursday's practice, so he could play. It really depends on his practice today, how that went. If he was a full participant, I fully expect him to see him play. Still, if he was a limited participant, kind of limited snaps in this game against New England, they're going to need him because New England is much worse against the run. But I still think that he might not see the field this week. Green Bay or Josh Jacobs against Arizona. Like I said, this Green Bay offense I really like. I think they're going to put up a bunch of points this week against a somewhat okay Arizona defense, but not great Arizona defense. Jamar Chase going to score above 18.4. Like, easy. Giants secondary is awful. Obviously, he's splitting work with T. Higgins, but that hasn't really stopped him. If anything, that's helped him out a lot. We saw 2 really big games with T. Higgins back. Kyle Pitts at Carolina. We could see a game like last week with Kyle Pitts, or we could see the 0.0 Kyle Pitts. It's really just a toss up. And then Mike Evans going up against Marshawn Lattimore. Lattimore has done pretty well against Mike Evans in the past couple of matchups. I don't expect Mike Evans to get too many points. Moving on to Elon Equality, who's only projected 104. And there's a reason why when we look at his team. CJ Stroud, pretty good start. I'll accept that. Rashad White and Javonte Williams, no. But he doesn't really have anyone else. I mean, Cooper Kupp bye and injured. Matthew Stafford bye. Travis Kelce bye. Devontae Adams injured or whatever. Christian McCaffrey injured. Elon Equality needs to make a trade for a running back, a decent running back at least. Rashad White, I think he's going to put up a stinker this week. Maybe doing like 6 points if we're being generous. Javonte Williams, I'm not too sure how this Denver team is going to fare against the Chargers. Denver's kind of been on a roll lately, winning their last 3 games. Chargers obviously coming off a bye. They could catch the Chargers by surprise because no one really expected this Denver team to do anything this year. Javonte could go above this 12.6, but that's only if he gets in the end zone. Zay Flowers, Rashid Shaheed, Christian Kirk, obviously not a great wide receiver core either. I know Shaheed kind of is questionable right now. He was a limited practice participant Thursday with Spencer Rattler, who I don't think is going to be making those deep throws Derek Carr does. I expect to see a complete bust week from Shaheed, not getting anywhere near these 12.5 points. Zay Flowers, I could see a big game from against Washington. But that really depends if Baltimore decides to run the ball or pass the ball. And then Christian Kirk, home game, but in London against a very good Chicago secondary. I don't know if Kirk goes off this week, to be honest, sadly. Dallas Goedert, they obviously got Devontae Smith back. They got A.J. Brown back. Obviously, Saquon's back there. I don't see that big of a week from Dallas Goedert unless one of those 2 wide receivers goes down with an injury. But I still see Caleb's Dogs easily beating Elon Equality. He really needs to make a trade to shake up this team. Maybe package some of his better pieces like Kelce or Kupp or something for some more depth. Some startable running backs or startable wide receivers. It's not looking too good for his team. And then our final matchup of the week, Steeler Virginia versus GT Rogers. GT Rogers put up 30 points with Kenneth Walker doing very good, catching a bunch of passes, obviously getting in the end zone. And Jordan Mason, who got injured. Haven't really heard much about his injury. Obviously, he went back in the game for 1 snap. Believed to have suffered a sprained AC joint in his left shoulder. I believe we've seen Anthony Richardson kind of, I think he missed all last season with a torn AC ligament. So got to just keep checking up on Jordan Mason, seeing if he's going to play next week. I doubt it, but we could see him back in week 8, I'd say. Jordan Love, I don't need to go over this again. I love the Green Bay offense this week. Saquon against this Cleveland defense. Saquon's just going to Saquon and absolutely go off. I expect to see around 20 points. I think that this projection is pretty good. Wan'Dale Robinson, the PPR scam. We might see a bunch of catches from Wan'Dale against this crappy Cincinnati defense. I don't know if it's going to total for a bunch of yards, but obviously those receptions are, they're a point each. So we've seen him get 32 receptions for 230 yards. That's less than 10 yards a catch. But kind of expect to see the same from Robinson. In this game, Dobbs, I'm a little bit more wary of just because obviously he missed last week because he was sitting out because he wanted a bigger role. I don't know if they give him that in this Arizona game. I expect to see a big Josh Jacobs, Jaden Reed, Tucker Kraft, and maybe even Dontavian Wicks game. I don't know if Dobbs is really going to get that many points up on the board. GT Rogers wide receivers are looking a little bit lackluster this week, but that's just because Justin Jefferson's on a bye. I guess Jalen Waddle's on a bye. Not looking too great. Sam Laporta, I think, could eat against this Dallas team, but it really depends. I think this is going to be a very run-heavy game for Detroit. Moving on to Steeler Virginia, Jalen Hurts has not looked great the past couple of games. I could kind of see a big bounce back game against this Cleveland defense, who's let up a bunch of points, who just completely crumbled to Jaden Daniels. David Montgomery getting at least a touchdown, if not more, against this Dallas team. Najee Harris, I'm a little bit scared of, like I said, against this Las Vegas team. I think that Max Crosby and the interior defensive liners can put a ton of pressure on Fields, make him scramble a lot more, and I don't see Najee getting that many yards. He could get some receptions. We've seen his receptions go up pretty drastically over this season, but I don't expect to see him do that well. T. Higgins against this Giants defense. We've seen some pretty good games from T, nothing extraordinary, but I expect to see another about 6 catches for 60 or 70 yards for T. So I think this 14.7 is right about the right projection. Jameson Williams, a big boomer bust candidate going against Dallas. I'm not too sure about JMO. I think that he could see one of those big 70-yard touchdowns again, or it could just be a game where he doesn't really get the ball at all. It really depends on how Jared Goff is feeling, how the offense coordinator of this Detroit team is feeling. Cole Kmet going up against Jacksonville. Like I said, I don't expect Chicago to pass the ball that much, and if they do pass, I don't expect it to really go to Kmet. But he doesn't really have that much better of a tight end on his bench. So I think Cole Kmet is the better start on this one. And then Devontae Smith coming back from injury, coming back from that concussion and the bye week, going up against Cleveland. I could see a big game from Smith as this Philly team tries to really kickstart the rest of their season after the bye week. We'll go over the standings real quick. So obviously in the East, Mason deserved it, being 4-1 team. Caleb's Dogs and Steeler Virginia both being 3-2. Me, Pick and 6 being 2-3, and Farms Fantasia being 1-4. Not looking too great from me, but I think with my team later on in the season, there's going to be a big bounce back. Obviously, moving on to the West with our only undefeated team, GT Rogers, I kind of expect that to continue to happen, at least for this week. Jack's team being second, hope I can get the win. It kind of just shows you how poverty the West is compared to the East, which is kind of more parity than poverty. Everyone's kind of tied up. And then Elon Quality sitting at 2-3, but still third place. Cream Pie and Deeper both going 1-4. The 1-4 teams are going up against each other this week, so we should see a 1-5 team. I'm not too sure who that will be. And then we'll go. Last thing we'll do today is go into this trade that Pick and 6 and Mason Deserved It had. So Mason Deserved It traded me Puka Nacua, David Njoku, and Devon Achane for Chuba Hubbard and Brock Bowers. I obviously dropped Trey Sermon. Might pick him up back up again with Jonathan Taylor being injured. But I really like this trade for my team. I keep on putting on like powerhouses, but it really depends on when they really get healthy, because obviously Devon Achane went out with I believe, a concussion. Puka Nacua is going to be out for another at least month. Once those people get really healthy, then I think it could be very good for my team. And then I traded away Chuba Hubbard because I don't expect as much production from him as Jonathan Brooks is getting back, but we'll see how that goes. And then Brock Bowers, I was sad to part with, but um, I kind of needed to add him to facilitate this trade. As you can see, this was our original trade, Devon Achane and Puka for Chuba Hubbard. It got vetoed, so I had to throw in Brock Bowers for David Njoku just to make sure that it would go through. That is our Week 5 preview, or Week 6 preview. Sorry, that is our Week 6 preview. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you.